Have you ever listened to someone's story? Maybe it's online or it's on a live stage, or maybe even in the meeting. And instead of feeling really inspired, it made you feel really uncomfortable. It's like you were sitting in their therapy session rather than receiving a message. This is the difference between what's called a raw story and an integrated story. And this is exactly what I want to speak to you about today. I'm going to show you how to move from raw to integrated so that your story doesn't express your pain, but it actually creates the influence and impact that you want your audience to receive. But in order to understand this, let's get really clear to understand the difference of a raw story and one that's integrated, because this will help you to self identify whether you are still in that raw stage or your story is integrated. When there's a story that's raw, you find yourself oversharing. There might be unprocessed emotion, and you're speaking from the wound. So you're still in it, right? Now, we often can mistake that, isn't that part of being vulnerable when you're sharing your story? Absolutely. The difference though, raw stories, they are real and vulnerable. But what ends up happening, it often places the audience in the role of a caretaker instead of creating the influence. And it may come from all the right intentions. However, it's having the wrong intention, right? An integrated story, this is when you've processed the experience, you've done healing around it, you've reflected on it, and you share your story from a perspective and an intention that's going to create a lesson or an insight. And what ends up happening is your audience receives the transmission, the transformation, not your therapy. Now, being a big advocate for real, raw, vulnerable authenticity, I had to learn this myself. I am a verbal processor, right? So for me to have healing, the best way is for me to express, right? To speak it out, which is what the purpose of therapy sessions are, that we speak to our problems, our challenges, our emotions, etc. And I would find it quite cathartic, quite healing about expressing it outside to my audience. And whilst I may be being of service for myself, it was actually a disservice to my audience, because what ends up happening is the audience starts to empathize, starts to feel that emotion a lot, to the point of they wanting to give you a hug. They might reach out and check in. Are you okay? Like, it sounds really, intense, traumatic, what you're going through, right? They're actually then feeling part of the rawness of your story. And one of the ways that you can identify even stories that you might be observing as a listener, as an audience, or even for yourself, is your language around it when you start to share the story. Raw stories normally speak to this happened to me. It's kind of still in victim, blame, like down, like feeling really down. There might be anger, resentment, sadness, all of that. So the emotions are really on a low vibration. And what ends up happening when you speak the story from that space, the audience, it becomes the caretaker, but that vibration of that story brings your audience down. Rather than really connecting, they feel really down, sad, and they might take that on. The difference between a raw to an integrated story is spoken more like, this is the lesson I carry for you. This is what I learnt along the way. This is what I see for you, right? Very different language. It's more empowering, it's more influential. You see, when I was 5 years old, I remember standing on a stage at preschool. And the reason I remember is I see a picture, but I remember that moment. And I was singing on the good ship, lollipop, in my white, red polka dot dress. I was completely in my element, joyful, unfiltered. That was my stage. But as I grew older, I started hearing comments like, "Oh, Michelle, you shouldn't sing. You don't really have the voice for it." Or, "Michelle is a lovely student, but she just talks too much." And I absorbed those words as truth. And I learnt that silence was safer than singing and speaking up. And so I stopped letting myself be seen, to truly be seen for who I was. Now, at first, when I told this story as an adult, it was really raw. I cried. I'd feel the sting again. I'd feel a lot of resentment and anger because I was speaking it from the wound. The look what happened to me. But over time, I healed those parts of myself. And I began to see that this wasn't about losing my voice. It was about reclaiming it. And that's when the story began to integrate. It was about seeing me for my brilliance. Now, when I share this story, I don't focus on my pain. I share the lesson that every time you silence yourself, you bury your light, your brilliance, your magic. And every time you speak, you reclaim a piece of your power. This is what I teach women leaders, how to integrate their story so it becomes a bridge for others rather than a therapy session. So when I tell it now, it's not for me, right? A raw story is for you to process. But when I speak it from an integrated space, it's for the women who've been told that they're too much or they're not enough. And it's a reminder that your voice isn't wrong, how you are isn't wrong. It's required to be more of you. Now, I wanted you to see the difference, to understand the difference of speaking a story that's integrated. And there's a lot of science behind that backs this up. If we think about narrative psychology, Dr. James Pennebaker found that simply dumping a painful story can actually increase distress, not only for you, but also for the audience. But when people create a coherent narrative with meaning, they heal faster and they build resilience. Dr. Paul Zach's studies of neuroscience shows that stories told with resolution trigger oxytocin, right? The trust and the empathy chemical. But those raw, unresolved stories, they often spike cortisol, not only to you as a speaker, but also the receiver of the story, really leaving your audience feeling uneasy. Integrated stories, however, they regulate and they resonate. That's the difference. As Bessel van der Kolk explains in The Body Keeps the Score, which is all about trauma research, trauma gets stuck in the emotional brain, right? Until it's processed into narrative and meaning. That's what makes it safe to share. So for you and for your audience. So the science proves it. Healing and integrating your story doesn't just help you, it also transforms how others receive it. That's the power of healing and speaking your story, but speaking it from an integrated space rather than a raw space. So here's my invitation to you. The next time you're about to share your story, right, I want you to pause and ask yourself, am I speaking and sharing this story from the wound or with the scar? Because your raw story expresses you and gives you a space to let it out, but your integrated story is what influences others. Your story isn't just about what happened to you, it's about what's possible for others through you. I want you to hear that again. Your story isn't just about what happened to you, it's about what's possible for others through you. So when you step into integrated storytelling, you're not just telling your story, you're changing someone else's. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and I look forward to seeing you the same time, same place, as we continue to speak up, share our brilliance, right? And really embrace the truth of who we are and our voice, because your voice is your revolution. Until next time, thank you.